What if one of the biggest causes of your anxiety has been hiding in plain sight?
You are about to hear our fascinating conversation with Julian Treasure, the world's leading listening expert. Julian's TED Talks have been viewed over 150 million times, and he spent decades studying how sounds shape your brain, your mood, and even your physical health.
In this episode, we uncover the hidden everyday noises that are quietly destroying your mental health, and more importantly, how to control the noise before it controls you.
Julian, since picking up your book's sound effects, it has felt like we've had earplugs magically removed from our ears. We've been hearing sounds that we never realized were all around us. And it's added such a beautiful, mindful experience to our lives. But I also have to be honest, living in New York City, I've also noticed just how many of the sounds around me are actually fueling my anxiety. So, based on your research, what are the sounds we should be avoiding if we want to feel happier?
Yes, you're right. If you're in New York, whenever I go to New York, it's a noisy city. It's not the noisiest in the world. There's a table of those in the book, isn't there? And the noisiest city in the world is Dhaka in Bangladesh, averaging over 120 decibels. That's rock concert loud average. Terrifying, really terrifying. New York's pretty loud. It's a lot louder than London. And it's, there are times when that's really unpleasant. When you're standing in a street and there's a truck or a bus with its air brakes suddenly goes right behind you and you didn't see it. Cortisol. Thank you very much. Cortisol. Or somebody is drilling, or somebody bangs something, or if you're on the subway, it's not quiet down there either. So there's a lot of these noises are intimidating and creating physiological reactions, emotional reactions, because they're making us feel unhappy, stressed, fatigued, anxious, and all these kind of negative emotions come up, which over time contribute to a lot of long-term mental and physical issues. Long-term stress is not good for you. Depression, anxiety, all these kind of things can result from being surrounded by noise, as well as long-term physical issues, because we now know that even moderate noise levels, 65 decibels, if you're exposed to that day after day, will increase your risk of heart attack and stroke. And there are a lot of other conditions which are affected by this kind of noise. Now, that's not insane amounts of noise. That's the average noise level in German schoolrooms, for example. So teachers are probably shortening their lives by working in that environment day after day. And then, as well as the physical and psychological impacts, we've got cognitive impacts. How well can you work in an open plan office when there's people talking around you? You have no earlids. You're programmed to decode language, and it's very difficult to think. We've all had that feeling. Can you shut up? I'm trying to think here. It's very difficult when people are talking around you because, language is exactly what you're supposed to be listening to. So your brain is paying attention to it. And then the final effect is on our behavior. And there's a wonderful study I talk about in the book where they ran alternating French. I can play it for you, actually. So a little bit of this on day one, and then a little bit of this on day two. And they kept alternating those two for weeks and weeks. And the result was on French music days, French wine outsold German wine 5-1. On the German music days, German wine outsold French wine 2-1.
Wow, that is incredible.
It's a huge shift in behavior, and nobody noticed the music. So this isn't people going, German music, therefore I should buy German wine. No. This is how powerfully sound is changing your behavior and mine, even when we don't notice it. So in all those ways, sound is so powerful. You ask me what's good and what's bad. Well, any sound that creates anxiety or stress or makes you feel uncomfortable is not good for you. And even background hums and buzzes. Now, there's an exercise I talk about in the book called savoring. And that's a very simple exercise to do where whatever room you're in, be it at home, at work, wherever, simply close your eyes and then listen and ask yourself, is this sound helpful? Is it helping me to do what I want to do in this space? Is it healthy? Is it good for me? And is it making me happy? Those 3 H's. And then if you get a no to any of those questions, change it. You can change it. This is where we start to become responsible for the sound we consume, which is really what the book is largely about. It's about the miracle and wonder of sound. It's about the importance and power of sound. And it's about, as you said, ultimately, mindfulness. It's about consciousness. Because if you open your ears and you have the experience that you guys have just had of kind of plugs being removed and suddenly listening, it's a new dimension to existence, and it creates a much greater degree of consciousness in the way you relate to the world around you, taking responsibility for the sound you create and the sound you consume. And that is a route to happiness, effectiveness, and well-being.
Cool. I love the quote that you put in the book from Eckhart Tolle, where he says, most people don't know how to listen because the major part of their attention is taken up by thinking. And it resonated so deeply with me because, well, first of all, we're huge Eckhart Tolle fans.
Me too.
But besides that, you're so right about this totally new dimension of consciousness that is opened up since paying attention to the sounds going through our ears. Because it's funny, you also say in the book that sound is actually the first of the 5 senses that we actually have, that we develop, where we hear the heartbeat before we even have physical ears. And when I read that, that blew my mind because it's one of the 5 senses that I think we take for granted so much more than sight, because sight is obviously right there in your face and something you pay attention to a lot of. But sound is one of those things where you don't really pay too much attention to unless you are triggered to by information that, like yours, that you're spreading, this idea that sound really does affect us. And if we pay attention to it, there's so much beauty all around us to savor, like you mentioned, that we've just been blind to because it is invisible.
I agree with Mike. After reading this, I've been paying a lot more attention to the little things, the clicking of my pen or
Right.
clicking down the coffee machine when it locks into place, and these little or closing my car door and hearing that thump, and it's just making me feel more alive, right? It's making me feel like I am in my environment rather than in my head. And I think that's been the biggest breakthrough for me from reading this book. So we want to just say thank you first and foremost for bringing some more consciousness into our life and allowing us to focus on something that we really had been not paying much attention to.
It's so good to hear that, and that's what the book is really there for. I've talked about it as a plea to listen in a world that's forgotten how. And of course, the critical thing about listening, it's not just a doorway into greater consciousness and greater enjoyment of the time we have on this planet. It's also critical for society, for families, for organizations to function. I did a talk years ago on the stage in Athens, on a TEDx stage in Athens, and the talk was called The Sound of Democracy. And basically what I said is the sound of democracy is listening. Because if we're not listening to understand other people, then society doesn't function. If I can't live next door to somebody with whom I fundamentally disagree and understand them a little bit, then society falls apart. Or you move from neighbors living next door to each other in Rwanda to people killing each other with machetes, which is what happened in that country suddenly, because they stopped listening. It became impossible to listen to people who are different. And we're seeing a lot of that in the world now with polarization in politics, in your country, in my country, across Europe. And we're seeing, countries led by power groups of people who surround themselves with yes people who don't dare disagree with them. In Russia, you disagree with Putin, you get thrown out of a window. In your country, you disagree with Trump, you don't get that, but you do get fired. So, it's, your career is over nevertheless. And so, that's a very fragile way to run an organization which is true also of many, many companies where you have bosses who surround themselves with people who are similar, the same, have the same outlook.
Yeah, no, Julian,
Sorry, go on.
no, I'm sorry. My question is, when did you first really discover the power of sound? Was there an aha moment for you where you're like, my goodness, I need to dedicate my life to this?
Well, there's been stages of that process. I was lucky enough to have a mother who bought me the classics for children when I was very young. I'm talking about records like A Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra by Benjamin Britten and Carnival of the Animals by Saint-Saëns and Peter and the Wolf by Prokofiev, I think that one is. So I had all those records and I loved them. I listened to them endlessly. And obviously, as I grew older, I developed my own musical tastes, which went off in slightly different directions, and then learned to play drums and played in bands and so forth. So I think music was my first access, and it still is incredibly important to me. I cannot listen to music and do anything else at the same time. I find it very difficult if I'm in a restaurant and there's music playing. It's a real struggle for me to have a conversation, actually, because the music is kind of getting in my ears and I'm paying attention to it. So I think music was the first access, first of all, listening to it and then playing it, making it. And that developed to listening, which many musicians have. In fact, I would probably suggest all musicians have, which is a very attentive multi-track listening. If you're in a band or an orchestra, you have to listen to all the other instruments and players at the same time. And simultaneously, by the way, you're doing something pretty complicated yourself with your limbs and or your voice, and you might be reading music, which is also extremely complicated to decode. So it's a lot going on there, and yet you've got this very attentive listening underpinning it. So you get into a way of listening to the world which is attentive and multi-track, listening to many things and registering at the same time. So I've always had that since I started playing, and I'm sure most musicians would identify with that. And as I say in the book, it's not surprising, therefore, that musicians have bigger brains than non-musicians. We now know that. I think Oliver Sacks said in one of his wonderful books, I think it was Musicophilia, that somebody doing a post-mortem would immediately be able to tell the difference between the brain of a musician and the brain of a non-musician. There's a substantive difference between those two. It's in the corpus callosum, the bit that connects the two hemispheres. Your left hemisphere is the one that's rational and deals with language. Your right hemisphere is the one that's kind of intuitive and deals with feelings and sounds, and music in particular is much more decoded in the right hemisphere. So the musician has to join those two together because you're doing technical things as well as intuitive things. And that's what the corpus callosum has got a lot more in a musician's brain than a non-musician. So those were my accesses to it, really. And then, I had a career in publishing, working with brands for 15 years, thinking, why don't they think about sound at all? So when I sold that company, I started an audio branding company. I had 20 years of doing that. And the final epiphany, I think, was because I was still asking that question of myself, why is it most organizations don't use audio branding? They don't think about it. They spend all their money on how they look and don't think about the sound. And it came to me eventually, you know what? If you put a whole bunch of people who don't listen into an organization, you get an organization that doesn't listen. Budget science, it took me a long time to work that one out. But it came down to, it all came down to individual listening. And that's the point. My third TED Talk was about listening. Although I went on to do one about architects and plea to them to listen. And the final one was about speaking. Nevertheless, that point really changed my life. And that's when I really wanted to focus. So I was delighted to have the opportunity to write this book. It took 2 years, and it was a labor of complete love doing it. I learned so much. It's a funny process when you're writing a book. You're researching stuff and going, oh my goodness, I never knew that. And then you're writing stuff and going, do you know, I never knew I knew that.
That is awesome.
And it was a great process.
Well, it showed through the text. And like we said, it was such an enjoyable read and has taught us a lot. And one thing that I am 100% taking from this, which you kind of mentioned now, as you were last speaking, was I have a daughter on the way, and I will be sure to be putting her. Thank you, and I will be sure to be putting her in many music classes to develop that brain, because I unfortunately never got that music training. But maybe it's never too late for me either.
It's never too late. You can always join a drum circle or a choir and just start singing. It doesn't take a lot of skill. There's plenty of neighborhood choirs who will welcome everybody in, no matter the skill level. It's all good for you. And as we now know, playing at any instrument, making music is good for you. It's good for all sorts of skills, for, cognitive skills. So, and also motor skills. And it's also now, there's a lot of research about the power of music to help with conditions like autism, with Alzheimer's, with all sorts of conditions where music therapy can really help people to manage their situation and even, defer things like mental debt, and what do we call it? The kind of Alzheimer's disease. I must have one because I can't remember the name. It's a little telltale, isn't it? But that sort of disintegration of mental faculties can be very much pushed back by music. People have responded to music, suddenly remembering things and recognizing people with a cue of music as opposed to words.
You know what I also love? That you gave exercises for people to, in a way, develop that musician's mind, even if they're not playing an instrument, through that mixer exercise, where the one exercise you talked about so far was closing your eyes and savoring the sounds. But I love the idea of the mixer exercise. Can you tell our listeners what's that about?
Yes, wherever you are, it could be in a beautiful forest, or it could be in a busy Starbucks. Other brands are available. Wherever you are, as opposed to it just being a mush around you, it's a very good exercise to start to pay attention and disentangle the individual sounds that you're experiencing. So, for example, you might think of it like a mixing desk. In a big recording studio, they have these huge mixing desks, and each channel is a separate instrument. Or, in my case, I'm a drummer. You'd have the bass drum on channel 1, the snare drum on channel 2, and so forth. So they all get mixed together in the final sound, but you can disentangle them if you pay attention. So it might be you're in a busy cafe and there's those people talking over there. There's somebody moving a chair over there. There's the barista banging over there. There's some not very useful music coming through those crappy little loudspeakers up there. All these kind of sounds are around you. And it's a wonderful exercise to pay attention. It's a mindfulness exercise to pay attention to each of them and become cognizant that you're not just listening to mush, you're listening to a mix. And if you do that, then it can help you a great deal to, again, select the sounds that are more healthy for you. And actually, you know what, I never answered that question you asked me right at the beginning, what's healthy and what's not? Generally, what we now know, and this is the theme in the book, all the way through the book really, is that nature sound, biophilic sound, or geophonic sound. There's a chapter in the book called Biophony and a chapter called Geophony. The sound of the planet is geophony. The sound of living things is biophony. Wind, water, birds. Largely those three. 2 geophony sounds, 1 biophony sound. Very good for us. I'm talking about gentle, pleasing variations. I'm not talking about a howling hurricane. I'm not talking about, a tsunami of water. I'm talking about pleasant sounds, gentle rainfall on leaves outside your window, a little babbling brook, a gentle waterfall, some wind whistling, or not so much whistling, gently murmuring through leaves or grass. Beautiful sounds that are just enormously stimulating to our to our neurology, and also make us happy and relaxed. They reduce stress, they reduce tension, and they are good for us in those ways. So those are sounds which I would always recommend. And birdsong, of course, is a huge one. The birds have been here for millions of years, a lot longer than we have. They date back to the days of the dinosaurs. And so we have evolved in birdsong. And therefore, it's a very comforting sound because we all know that when the birds are happily singing, normally things are okay, things are safe. It's only when the birds suddenly stop singing you need to start worrying, because there's lots of records of that happening when there's a tsunami coming or a volcano about to erupt. It all goes quiet. So they're very, I mean, again, I write about this in the book, and there was lots of fascinating stuff to discover about the way birds can sense infrasonic sound way below the level we can hear. And there are things called barooms, which are the infrasonic sounds of the ocean, which is probably how birds manage to navigate across thousands of miles of sea without any land to look at. They can hear the distant sound of a shore through these infrasonic vibrations.
That's insane.
Yeah.
What about the sounds that we should be avoiding?
Well,
So we know what makes us healthy, but what are the ones that, like, are there any telltale signs like that all humans have an aversion to these sounds, or these sounds are known to spike those cortisol levels in us?
well, there's a table in the back of the book which was created by an acoustician in the UK called Trevor Cox, of the most hated sounds, the most unpleasant sounds. And I seem to remember the top of the list was somebody retching, I think, wasn't it? Give or take. We also do not like baby crying. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been on a plane with somebody else's baby crying near you for hours. It is really stressful, because that's a sound that we're genetically programmed to do something about. You know, you hear a baby crying, you want to do something. As somebody else's baby, there's nothing you can do apart from grind your teeth and put the headphones on. But, you know, those kind of sounds, which are alarm sounds, and in this modern day and age, a ringing phone would be that. You know, will somebody please answer that phone? You know, that kind of sound. Any beeps, threatening sounds that are followed by some sort of association of negativity, screeching brakes, loud, sudden sounds, which typically mean danger in some way, shape, or form. So, you know, a car backfiring, for example, will make you jump and straight into cortisol again. Voices of people you don't like. There are all sorts of sound create negative reactions. You know, have you ever worked with, a boss who really is horrible to you, and every time you hear their voice, you get a stress reaction? So this can happen. Sound can be a wonderful servant. It can help us. It can calm us. It can make us happy. It can give us all sorts of happy hormones. You know, we can get endorphins and all sorts of good things going on in our neurochemistry by listening to music that we love, or by hearing the sound of somebody we do love. You know, I mean, when you fall in love with somebody, you just hear the sound of their voice, and you get this massive cascade of happy hormones through your system. So there's a lot of power in there. The key really is to start becoming conscious of the sounds that help you and the sounds that hurt you. Because if you're just stumbling through life unconscious, you're probably being surrounded by sounds that are hurting you without even knowing it. They're shortening your life. They're creating illness of all sorts of varieties in you, mental, physical illnesses. And that's why this listening is such a wonderful passport to a healthier and happier life.
Where does silence come in?
It's very, very important. And the whole last chapter of the book is, of course, you know, if you've read it, as you have read the book, the whole last chapter is called Silence. Silence is the baseline. It's the foundation. Dame Evelyn Glennie says silence is a sound. And I agree with her. There's a wonderful film I was in called In Pursuit of Silence. And in fact, I put that whole film into my new online community, the Listening Society. So it's in there for people to watch. And it's a beautiful film by a guy called Patrick Shen about noise and silence, and why, you know, the relationship between those two things and how they affect us. There's a lot of people who find silence threatening or difficult, particularly since more than half of humanity lives in cities now. We're surrounded by noise the whole time, pretty much. There's no silence. Even in New York, you can get to quieter places. You can go to, is it Bryant Park? And, you can go on the High Line, and maybe you can find quieter places where you can sit away from the noise a little bit, but you're not going to get silence. There's a plane going overhead. There's somebody drilling over. There's a leaf blower over there. There's, a truck going past, whatever it is. So I am very encouraged by the growth and the popularity of things like Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing, where people leave a city like New York or go to the nearest natural area and walk in nature and simply be. You don't have to hug a tree. You can simply be amongst them, but you listen to the sound of nature around you, and it's good for the soul. It's good for the body.
I resonate with that so much. Me and my wife were just in Hawaii, and we did this thing in Maui called the Road to Hana, which is this super, super windy road. And it was very anxiety ridden for a vacation. And we were both getting really, really anxious. But at the end of this Road to Hana, there was a hike that we wanted to do, a 4-mile hike. And as we started that hike, we turned to each other and we said, for some reason, this thing that was supposed to be so relaxing is getting us all worked up. Like our heart rate was up and we just did not feel good. And that was the end of that conversation. And then we just started hiking. We just started paying attention to the bamboo trees, cackling against each other, clacking against each other. And we just started paying attention to the sounds of the birds and just started paying serious, mindful attention to the hike and the nature around us and the waterfalls. And I remember walking out of that hike and feeling 1,000 pounds lighter and just turning to my wife and saying, I cannot believe how healing that hike was. And it makes so much sense now that you're talking about it. Really is a healing thing. The silence and the beauty of the geophony and the biophony, as you call it, was seriously extremely healing, and it was so easy. It wasn't this magic. It was like a magic pill, but it was all natural.
Well, you say it's easy, and unfortunately, it's not so easy these days because, my old friend Bernie Krause, who I quote in the book, and the other nature sound recordists like him will tell you that it's very difficult now to record pristine nature sound because there's a jet going over, or there's somebody 5 miles away with a leaf blower, which you can still hear, even that far away. So we are surrounded by electromechanical noise, and there's not much of the planet that's not overflown now by jets. So even if you're in the middle of Greenland, you'll have jets going over every minute or two on the way to or from America, from Europe. So even the most remote places, it's quite hard to sit and get nothing but nature. It's one reason why I live up here in Orkney, because I can. I can get away. It doesn't take me very much distance to go to a beach where all I can hear is nature, unless I'm very unlucky. But it's not true of a lot of the world, and particularly in cities, people don't experience that at all. So it's not surprising that we have an epidemic, really, of stress in the Western world. And, well, not just the Western world. It's associated with architecture, I think. And I talk about that in the book, and the idea that architects are obsessed with how things look. So we're put in these hermetically sealed buildings, air conditioned, temperature controlled, sealed off from the outside, and that's not natural for us. There's a lot of people working on biophilia, which is, I'm glad to say, coming into architecture now, where we're bringing the outside inside to a degree to reconnect with the natural world, which of course we are part of. We're not above it. We're not custodians or guardians of the planet. We're part of it. We always were. And that's why listening was so important for hundreds of thousands of years. And it's so weird that we've lost contact with it in the last just few hundred years. Really, we've just lost contact with the sense, with the importance of it. These buildings, they're not healthy for us, and we're seeing that in this epidemic of stress everywhere. We like greenery because green stuff means water, which is life, and it probably means food, which is life. So there's an immediate kind of attraction towards green. There's an attraction towards nature's sound because it means things are healthy and alive around us and safe as well, as long as it's not the sound of a lion or something behind you. And there's also this feeling that we want to have good air and good vision. We want to be able to see the distance because that's how you stay safe. If you can see stuff coming towards you from a distance away, you've got time to run.
It's crazy how everything is just based on evolutionary biology. Like the sounds we're attracted to, the sounds we are not attracted to, it's all based on evolutionary biology.
On that note, something that I've done that since reading your book that has helped me tremendously, which I think can also help anyone listening right now, is every morning, many people set an alarm to wake up. And many of the alarms that we commonly hear are just like blaring sounds to just wake up, right? Exactly. And ever since reading your book and realizing the importance of like hearing these sounds of nature, I have now changed my alarm clock to wake me up to the beautiful sound of birds in the morning. And the difference I feel in my stress level waking up to that versus what I was in the past when I had that blaring alarm has been dramatically different. And as you know, how we start our day is usually how the rest of our day goes. So it's such a small little tweak that is so practical to change that alarm clock to something that is a soothing nature sound.
And on the other,
Get you up in the morning.
on the other end of that, the other thing you talk about is the sound of the waves crashing to go to sleep, because once again, the evolutionary biology comes into play that you talk about. Most of the soundscapes that have waves are at 12 cycles per minute. And that's the same number of cycles that our breathing goes through per minute while we are sleeping. So it's crazy how everything has just this deeper science behind it. So wake up to birds, go to sleep to waves, and you'll be feeling good.
Absolutely right. I mean, that is a fantastic recipe for both ends of to bookend your day, actually. The same thing I would do as well. I mean, the surf sound, gentle surf, is a beautiful, beautiful sound to go to sleep to. And it's a great antidote if anybody ever suffers from insomnia. It's a really good thing to do. And I played it to my daughter. She's got other things that she likes now because we're all different. And hey, it's hard to be prescriptive with sound. You know, people often say to me, "Oh, what's the best sound to work to?" Well, I don't know the answer to that question because I don't know you. You need to play with things. I'm sure there's somebody in the world who works best to incredibly loud death metal. Now, that's true. Would not
Yeah.
work for me, but I'm sure there's somebody out there who loves that so much that that's what makes them happy. You have to experiment with things and find out what works for you.
Another thing that your book helped me to realize was I have a friend who I used to live with as my roommate, and I never realized how good of a sound environment architect he was this whole time. So we lived together, and I realized while he was cooking, he'd have the perfect song for while he was cooking. And when he was driving to an appointment, he would make sure he had the perfect song for him driving to an appointment. He was a real estate agent. And when he was with a woman, he would make sure he had the most perfect song for when he was with the woman. He would light the candle and he would create this sound environment no matter what he was doing throughout the day. And I noticed now in hindsight how much joy he added to his life by carefully curating the sound environment every step of the way. And now I, since reading your book, have tried to do the same, where as I'm going to work, I want to make sure I have the song that's putting me in the right state of mind. Or while I'm working, I have that classical music that I personally like. Or while I'm going to sleep, the waves. Like being more proactive, not just in the beginning and end of the day, but throughout the day to kind of counteract that city environment of the drills and the crazy loud noises all day long is a great recipe for happiness for me since reading the book. So once again, thank you for that.
That's so good to hear. I can't tell you how this is music to my ears to hear this. And that's that is the whole argument of the book, is to become conscious of the sound we're consuming and to think carefully about it and to curate. And curating is a really good word to use for this. Um, whether it's, if you do that exercise we started with of savoring in your home, close your eyes in the kitchen, it may well be you go, oh my goodness, do you know, I never noticed the fridge buzzing like that. I'm the person who goes into hotels, particularly in America. I go out into the corridor and I turn off the ice machine. Or I unplug the fridge in my room because the fridge in my room is going, you're, you're, you're all night. And it's just ridiculous. I'm sorry. Somebody doesn't care who put that in, and I do. So I'll turn it off. And curating the sound around you is very important. I mean, I will also complain in restaurants, and it's very important to do that too. I mean, you can't change a restaurant where they mistakenly think that noise is the same as buzz. So they have an open plan kitchen with clattering. Every surface is hard. They've got music going on. And, in order to have a conversation, you're shouting at the top of your voice to your dinner companion, and you go home with a sore throat and a sore head. Well, okay, if I'm in a place like that, I can't stop them doing that, but I can at least say, I will not be back because this has been a horrible experience. And, I'm very unhappy. I'm stressed and tired. And I couldn't taste the food either because we now know from research that if you're overloaded in your ears, it kicks into other senses. So a loud restaurant, we can't taste the food as well as in a quiet restaurant, which is why you won't find many fine dining restaurants with pounding music or, open plan kitchens where you can hear what's going on. So, yeah, I think curating is a great word.
You also say basically the speed of the music can also affect how quickly we eat, right? So maybe that's a good thing to keep in mind too, because as we all know, eating very quickly is usually not the healthiest thing. So listening to music that's playing at a very high speed can influence our behavior of eating that meal extremely quickly, which is not great for our health.
Yeah, I feel like so often. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go on.
I just feel like so often people come to us specifically and ask us, like, I get the whole mindful thing, but how do I actually practice mindfulness? Like, what does that even mean in real life? And I think this whole idea of paying attention to sound really, really carefully, and then going one level beyond that and curating that sound, no matter what it is we're experiencing in daily life, is one of the best ways to practice that mindfulness because it creates an automatic switch in your consciousness to really pay attention to what you're experiencing in that moment. And it does quiet the mind and it does help you to relax if you're curating things in the way that you want to, like turning off that humming refrigerator that you didn't realize the whole time was secretly creating this buzz of anxiety inside your body.
And ultimately, all mindfulness really is exactly what Mike said, is paying attention.
Yeah.
Is paying attention to this moment and what we're taking in all around us.
And speaking of that, I think that's the perfect transition to our final question for you, Julian. If you had the entire world listening and paying attention so consciously to you right now, what would you want them to hear?
What's going on around them. I would want them to open their ears and listen. And, from that moment on, to a transformative moment, because, there's a couple of really important things about listening. Listening is a skill. Hearing is a capability. Listening is a skill. It's a skill you can practice and master. And it's an action. It's work. So if you're not conscious that you're doing something, you're probably not listening. That's really important to understand. And everybody's listening is unique and different, as I talk in the book about the filters that you listen through. So if you understand that, it's an access, really big access to compassion and to a better society. Because if I know that your listening is different from mine, I'm not talking to myself, I'm talking to you. You have a different background to me. You've come a different road to this conversation here today. And we listen to all these filters, values, attitudes, beliefs, culture, language, intentions, expectations, assumptions, all these things, emotions, all these things color our listening. It changes through the day. It changes from person to person. And if I understand that, then I can, to use an old analogy from Ram Dass, actually, it's seeing people as trees. You don't walk through a forest and go, that oak is ridiculous, that elm is ridiculous. They're just, that's the kind of tree they are. And if you can go through life seeing people with their different listings, that, oh, that's the kind of tree you are. I'm not judging. It's not judging. It's simply accepting. And then we can move into the biggest thing I think is missing in the entire world, which is validation. And that's a big part of the work I'm on now, is to take this. Validation is kind of the next level on from passive listening. Validation is, you know what, I don't agree with what you said, but I can see why you believe that. I can see why you think that. Now, your reality is not my reality. So you may be very upset about something that just happened. I wouldn't be, but I understand why you are. That is what we need for society to work, for teams to work in organizations, for families to work. We need that. We need to get back to that level of listening with compassion. You know, I talk about the 4 C's in the book of the 4 C's of listening, which are commitment, compassion, curiosity, and also, of course, consciousness. Conscious that you're doing something. So that's the key thing. And it's, you talked about listening as a form of meditation almost. And I think in conversation, that's a great access to this. Stephen Covey talked about everybody listening to respond, and as opposed to listening to understand. And if you're actually listening in conversation, you need to be empty. So it's very close to meditation. You have to trust that your mouth is going to know what to do when it comes to your turn, not be sitting there composing your next brilliant bit of monologue or critiquing what they're saying. It's an emptiness and a reception. So it's a much more kind of, there's a yin and yang, I think, about sight and vision and hearing. Vision much more directed and outward. Hearing is passive. And so this passive being filled up with somebody else's words without judging and then responding, that is a beautiful flow, again, which we've lost a lot in the modern world. We need to get back. So yeah, that was a long answer to that question.
That was a beautiful answer. That was beautifully said. And you mentioned the new project that you're working on, the Listening Society, to help people become better listeners. Do you want to talk about it for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. They call these things online communities. I'm not sure it's really a community. It's a resource. I would love it if people come in and meet other people, and there is the capability to do that, make new friends, post problems, and have other people answer them. So I very much want it not to be just about me and all my work, but to start it off, I've put tons of my work in there, all my training courses, loads and loads of podcasts I've done over the years, documents, research, webinars, all sorts of things. So it's if you'll pardon the pun, it's a treasure trove of goodies for anybody who's interested in improving their listening skills or speaking skills actually as well, or exploring the power and wonder and majesty of sound. So, for example, just over the weekend, I was putting together a curated list of TED Talks. It's quite a long process to find all the TED Talks about sound and listening and speaking power and lots of fun things as well. But there's dozens of them I've now put in there. So it's just saving people time. It's focus, and it's really giving people resources which will allow them to be better listeners. And guys, what I'll do is I'll send you a link that you can put in the show notes for this. We're giving you and any of your listeners a month free trial access to the Listening Society. See if you like it. It's not very expensive to be a member. And the reason I want to charge for it is because then I can take on a small team of people to really build this into what I want it to be, which is a resource to power up the world's listening. I've come up with this new phrase for myself, the listening alchemist. And that's what I want to do. I want to turn the world's listening to gold. That's the task. And I'm hoping the Listening Society is going to help do that.
That's beautiful. Well, I think you're well on your way to making that happen. And, they say it starts with one. Well, in this case, it started with 2 here. So I want you to know that you've already deeply impacted us, and we will absolutely add that link to the show notes. We want to say thank you for making us more mindful listeners, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us, Julian. Appreciate you.
Always a pleasure, guys. Thank you.
Appreciate you. Thanks, Julian. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end.
If you like this episode of the podcast, you'll probably also like this one right here. So give it a click.
Love ya.
Peace.